this incredibly interesting seminar that has been co-organized by the European Liberal Foundation, Liberal Forum, sorry, and the Tamm Foundation. I have to admit that when I look at the incredible work that the European Liberal Forum has managed to achieve in the last 2 or 3 years of existence, already 4 years of existence, I can only congratulate you because, as you know, ELF was established from the scratch. I mean, European political parties decided that it was necessary to give the possibility for political foundations to be established, and we are proud as Tamm, and I'm also a member of the Tamm Foundation. We are proud of being part of the ELF. I would also like to extend this gratitude to the Tamm Foundation, in particular to its director, Agustí Columinas, but also to Monica Sabata, who has been organizing together with Daniele and other people this wonderful seminar. I think we enter at the final phase of this seminar with this roundtable entitled, sorry, because I was given the title, entitled Cosmopolitan Nationalism, a Liberal Concept. And as you know, and as it has been discussed in the previous session with Dr. Saez, for many, many decades, the term nationalism has been very, very badly and very wrongly connotated in many parts of Europe, particularly the German-speaking countries and also the Benelux region, but also in the Nordic countries and other countries. That's why we had to, I wouldn't say invent, but we had to come up with concepts such as civic nationalism or cosmopolitan nationalism or even regionalism in a more political discussion, which could be in a way understood as a way to move beyond one's own specific political, territorial, or cultural attachments. I think that it was Vertovec and Cohen that defined cosmopolitanism as the middle path between ethnocentric nationalism that Dr. Saez spoke before and particularist multiculturalism. Hence, from this point of view, cosmopolitanism and nationalism can be compatible if the first one is not banal. Maybe Montserrat Guivarnau spoke about one of his famous concepts of banal cosmopolitanism, and if nationalism is not ethnocentric, which is the case, for instance, for Catalan nationalism or Catalanism. Let me give you an example. Let's take the example of the European Union, that, as you know, is the most successful post-national reality or project in the world. As a concept, at least. I mean, we will not now look into the current reality in which the European Union is at the moment. But if you have lived or worked in Brussels, you will notice that there are like several groups of cosmopolitan people in Brussels. Like you can find cosmopolitan people in Brussels here, there, in different pubs, in different restaurants, in different institutions. But I wonder, is the European Union the people that live and work in Brussels? I consider myself as one of them. I do not work now in Brussels, but I used to work and lived in Brussels for some years in the past. Or is also the European Union the people, politicians, sometimes even officials, that represent the national realities and the national member states in Brussels? And if you go to the second class of Europeans, you will notice that at the end of the day, what they defend in Brussels, and whenever you say Brussels, you can say Luxembourg, or you can say Rome, or you can say Paris, is a sort of cosmopolitan nationalism, because they defend the positions of the people that are representing. And of course there are, like, I'm not saying that everyone acts like former President Kaczynski from Poland, because that would be failing to reality. So we have a certain degree, but Europe, as the most successful post-national project in the world, is at the same time a very nationalistic, from this cosmopolitan perspective, project. That being said, I think it's time to give the floor to our interesting and well-known speakers, panelists that will accompany us today in this session. And if you notice it, I have not answered directly the question that is being asked at the panel. Is cosmopolitan nationalism a liberal concept? Because I believe that this is what you have to answer and not me. So I will start from my right-hand side, introducing to you Mr. Daniele Conversi, who will be the first one to speak. And you will see that I will give the floor to each of them, and after that I'm going to open it for debate, open the floor for debate, further debate, comments, criticism, whatever you like. So Daniele Conversi is a research professor at the Iker Basque Foundation and the University of the Basque Country in Bilbo, in Euskadi. He received his PhD at the London School of Economics and worked in various institutions, including the Cornell University and the Central European University in Budapest. He is an expert on nationalism and globalization, so basically the two concepts that encompass the question that we have been asking today. His first book, The Basques, the Catalans, and Spain, is still widely used across various disciplines. Mr. Conversi.
Your very kind introduction. Moltes gràcies a la Fundació e a Agustí Colomines, obviamente, per convidar-me e a vosaltres per estar aquí. La presentació serà en anglès, però vosaltres podeu fer totes les preguntes que caldrien fer en castellà, en català, en anglès, com vulgui. So what I'm going to speak today, as I have already published a book in which I strongly claim that Catalan nationalism is a cosmopolitan kind of nationalism. And there are strong liberal components. Everything is written in the book, so I'm not going to talk about that. It's there, and it's. I talk. So you have to buy the book, he says, but I didn't. It's been translated in Catalan per Editorial Pagès, Els Vascos, el Catalans y España. Está traduito al català. I will speak about different things. I will speak about two negative examples of cosmopolitanism. I mean, one is from my own country, and it relates to a very important figure, which is a mythical figure in Italian nationalism, and is considered an important international figure in nationalism, and in nationalism, particularly in liberal nationalism. His name is Joseph Mazzini. What I argue, I mean, this is the first example. The second example will come from another book which I published also in Catalan, La Desintegració de Yugoslavia. This is much more negative than the first, perhaps. But let's see how the negative dimensions of this relationship can develop. Mazzini was a very renewed figure in intellectual circles throughout the world, because he was an exile. He was exiled mostly in London. In London he met several people who were particularly Irish, but also English from the working class movement, the Chartists in particular. And everywhere he perorated the cause of Italy and tried to associate the cause of Italy to other causes. So he linked the struggle of other people to his own struggle, and therefore he created a powerful network, international networks, in which his ideal could be advanced. First of all, he was the first thing, he was a strong nationalist, and I would consider that is often indicated as an example, cosmopolitan. For the translator, this is, I start reading page 2. Page 2, yes, at the end of page 2. Giuseppe Mazzini is conventionally indicated as an example of cosmopolitan and liberal nationalist. But these credentials were in part derived from his rhetorical ability to take advantage of Europe's peculiar situation at the time. It was a period of the spring times of people, 1848, and several other developments. Mazzini was hailed by his contemporary as a cosmopolitan universalist, even endowed with a Kantian philosophical approach, which is to me paradoxical, because he is nothing as so different from his approach. He was happy to exploit international support for the Italian cause as a road into the British left. As I mentioned, the Chartist movement was particularly important. As we know, he achieved truly international standing as he set out to support keen movements modeled after his Young Italy. This is important because Young Italy was a very was inspiring lights for several other nationalist movements, and some of them extreme nationalists, and the last of them was a genocidal kind of nationalist, so the opposite of what he is trying. I will come to do in a second. The emulator spring up everywhere in the Jeune Suisse, the Giovane Svizzera, Young Switzerland. Mazzini was against, by the way, Swiss neutrality. That's very important to understand how he didn't believe in this idea of Swiss being neutral from the rest of Europe. Young Ireland was perhaps the most important of them, or the follower of Mazzini. And of course there were kind of literarian association which were more literary than politicals, like the Young Germany, Young Poland. In Catalonia we have the Giove Catalonia, but it's something which develops much later, and it only took some Mazzinian symbols. The worst, the most sinister of all of them was the Young Turks. The Young Turks was 26 years after being founded, were the major actor in the genocides of the Armenian and several other Christian minorities in Turkey. So the kind of nationalism which all this young, of course there was Young Europe. Some very mistakenly, Young Europe is indicated as a kind of predecessor of the modern European concept. Modern European unity. It is nothing farther from the truth. Young Europe was an association, a network of nationalist, solipsistic organizations, which only established networks within there. I developed a theory in the past, an approach arguing that there is a kind of solidarity which has cosmopolitan between small nations, which has feature of cosmopolitanism, trying to overcome nationalism. The problem is when these young movements become translated into action, they become quite radical. In Italy, I mean, the case of the Young Turks is an extreme case, but all these young associations had a common idea, which was an homogeneous nation state. That was the goal. The idea of the nation which they espoused was a nation as an organicist, as a homogeneous unit which did not admit internal contradictions. And everything which was kind of disturbing this uniformity would be considered an obstacle to the progress of the nation. Mazzini was a modernist, was a secularist, not really an atheist, perhaps an atheist, but it was part of a long Italian, the beginner of a long Italian traditions of secularists, which included Mussolini, of course, and we should not forget that Mussolini was a great admirer of Mazzini, And many of the strongest fascists, most radical fascists, were, as saw Mazzini, not only as the founding father of Italy, but as the most important Italian leader. Their example, like Italo Balbo, for instance, continuously referred to Mazzini as his greatest inspiration. Italo Balbo was quite a ferocious fascist. Now, this Michael Mann has used the word nation-statist to indicate this kind of model of thought model. The idea is that there was a nation state, and this nation state is homogeneous, and if homogeneity was not there, it should be created. In the case of Mazzini, when before Italy, the result of his action was, in practice, that a country which was a series of independent or semi-independent, semi-sovereign republics and with kingdom became a strong centralized state. He hated everything which was separatism and anything which was regionalism and even federalism. And if a movement like Catalonia would have, Catalan nationalism would have actually emerged in Italy, he would not have hesitated to use the strongest force to exterminate the movement, because it was completely impossible for him to accept anything like minority nationalist movement within his idea of Italy. And this is very clear, very clearly shown how he dealt with the brigandage, which was a phenomenon which was preceded the Italian unification, but after the Italian unification assumed a political connotation which it did not necessarily have before. A lot of people joined the brigandage for political reason, and that's should be distinguished from traditional brigandage. And the brigands very often were anti-centralist and were exterminated. The history, the entire village were burned, and that was how Italian cosmopolitan is the fusion between liberalism and cosmopolitan and nationalist work in Italy. Now I will have to go. I don't know how many minutes I have. Very few, very briefly. Also, this one is in a book, so for those who it's mostly there. In the book, I start with a very positive example regarding Catalonia. I argue that Barcelona was the city in Europe in which you had the greatest number of demonstrations against the Bosnian genocide. I argue also that before that the idea of being a minority, a stateless nation, somehow create a special sensibility for what's happening in the rest of the world. So there are antennae in Barcelona, which other parts of the world they do not exist. What happened first in Slovenia and Croatia, and particularly in Bosnia, was very much followed in Catalonia. In Barcelona, there was association Barcelona-Sarajevo, was quite unique. They established a strong link between Barcelona and Sarajevo. All this, again, to show that the kind of nationalism which we have in Catalonia is a bit sui generis. But still, I am very critical of the relationship between, in general, of the relationship between cosmopolitanism and nationalism. Of the two, the weakest one is cosmopolitanism, by far. If there is an alliance between the two, who is going to win? Who is going to take the precedence? Who is going to be the winner? It's definitely nationalism. And I'm talking about state nationalism, most of the time I'm right, but in general, nationalism is anti-particularist, is a particularist force in general, and nationalism is anti-universalist, is solipsistic. It's difficult for a person who is deeply engaged into nationalist vision to understand, to take a view of a global dimension. Of course, it's not impossible, of course. And in the case of Yugoslavia, I argue, for instance, very significantly that while in Catalonia there was a big awareness, in the rest of Europe, particularly in France and in England, this was not the case. The majority of British in the left, but also in the right, supported Milosevic until the very end, supported ethnic cleansing. Why? Because, precisely because the center, through its networks of embassies and its network of consulates and several other facilities, they achieved to support a view that Yugoslav, Serbian nationalism was more open, and the bad ones were secessionists, and Europe did not recognize that. It took more than a genocide. It took the attack on Slovenia, the attack on Croatia, and the genocide in Bosnia. Well, the genocide started in Croatia, in Vukovar, before the international community did act. And this is because the international community do not want, has never wanted actually, to recognize new states. This is something which Catalan nationalists will have to face sooner or later. If the independence is declared at some point, it's very unlikely that the rest of Europe, if it is unilateral, will at all have sympathy. I mean, in the case of Croatia, the Serbian propaganda clearly indicated that the Croatians were Ustaše, which means neo-Nazis. And a lot of people like to believe that, not that they really believe that, they like to believe, which is different, because nobody wants to recognize new states. And this is something which occurs in waves. As you know, the recognition of new states occurred after World War I, very tragic wave, of course, after decolonization, after the collapse of the Soviet Empire, and in the case of Yugoslavia, is of course we have to wait for NATO bombing of Yugoslavia before Kosovo and Montenegro would be recognized at the end. So it's always after some very dramatic and violent outcomes that recognition is accorded by the international community. This is all explained. There is an entire section which is called about German bashing and the breakup of Yugoslavia. It's really Germany was the scapegoat because it was the first, especially for the first country, we tried to move in an original way, especially under the Genscher, the FDP, was extremely aware, like in Barcelona. There was very few places in Europe where people were very aware about what was going on. And in the case of the part of the German intelligentsia, the German politicians, which were, of course, not a majority party, but still have an influence, a very strong influence at the time, they succeeded in turning and changing the policy of Europe. Because, of course, what the Americans, they say, it is because of Germany, therefore even Warren Christopher, the US Secretary of State, then used Germany as an excuse to do nothing, because actually it was because Germany has a plan to attack Yugoslavia and to create a new axis, a new Fourth Reich. So these things were popular, were listened, and people as important as State of Department were actually listening to this kind of voices. Okay, all this to say that what is come as a cosmopolitan nationalism is very often becomes the opposite. So it's and we have to look to different things. We have to look at the way in which the nation is envisaged, at the practice. Of course, the nation state have the power to destroy lives, and stateless nations do not have the same power. But still, what is important is to see how the relationship between cosmopolitan and nationalism it evolves, which is not at all easy. So I conclude by saying that with the various challenges that we have today, nationalism certainly needs to be scrutinized very carefully, because it is a double-edged sword. It's a Janus face, as Montserrat Guibenau say, and Tom Nairn say, and it can promise one thing and do something. But apart from that, in generally, I still argue that there are different kinds of nationalism, are obviously more cosmopolitan than others. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Conversi, and thank you for concluding that we have to look at the practical expressions and the practical realities of how cosmopolitan nationalism can actually be applied in several cases. I mean, you mentioned the case of Italy and Yugoslavia, but also you made some concluding remarks on the case of Catalonia. I will move to our next speaker today. I'm sorry because here it's, as you can see, it's very cozy. Yeah? This table is so I will now move to my left hand side, and I will introduce you Mr. Sascha Tamm, who represents here the Liberal Institute of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation. I did forget to mention that the Naumann Foundation, that as you know is one of the large political foundations in Germany, is also behind the organization of this seminar, and we're always grateful to the support, not only economic, also political, that the Naumann Foundation is providing to many countries and many political forces in the world. So Mr. Sascha Tamm holds degrees on philosophy, political science and physics from the Dresden, Leipzig and Urbana-Champaign universities. He has worked as freelance coach, author and ghostwriter, and he joined the Friedrich Naumann Foundation in 2001. One of the interesting points that he has in his CV is that he was, for some years, until April 2009, he was the head of the Naumann Foundation in Moscow.
From April 2009.
Until, okay.
Until July this year.
Okay, until July of this year. So he has been going through and witnessing an important period of the history of Russia, which is a very nationalistic country, but maybe not civic nationalistic. So, Mr. Tamm, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you again for inviting me to this beautiful city of Barcelona. I've been here before, I don't know exactly, 4 or 5 years ago as a tourist, and it's always very good if you can come again, visit your beautiful city again, and your employer pays, not yourself for this. Okay, I will not give a perfect answer to the question, but I would like to make 2 points which are, from my perspective, very important about liberalism, because we talk about nationalism, cosmopolitism, and so on, and ask whether this is a liberal concept or not. We should define what is liberalism all about. You know, many books have been written about this, and there's a lot of controversy about liberalism, and therefore I would try to start from 2 points probably all liberals can agree on. The first one is liberalism is about individual freedom and individual rights. In the center of liberalism are individuals, not other entities. Individuals, people. People, not peoples. Yeah, that's important. Everything, all other political questions are secondary. If you have perfectly working government machine and it oppresses people, it's not liberal. Even if it is effective or efficient or whatever. It's the main criterion is individual freedom. It's the first thing. But liberalism, political liberalism, probably philosophical liberalism could to some extent stop here and say, okay, let's evaluate, is cosmopolitan nationalism liberal in this sense? Does it help? And I will try to give an answer on this. But the second thing very important for liberals is political institution guaranteeing individual freedom. That means liberalism is about individual rights and institutions guaranteeing those individual rights and individual freedom. And that's probably the more important part for our discussion on the part on political institutions. But very briefly about individual rights. I think cosmopolitan nationalism, as is defined by you and by the colleagues I've heard before, is completely a liberal concept if it respects individual rights. And you know, it was never realized probably by textbook, cosmopolitan nationalism. But the only question is if the entity created afterwards, for example, an independent Catalonia, or an independent whatever, Kurdistan, respects individual rights, applies the rule of law, and so on. And one criterion which is very important, and it brings us to the second thing, is openness. You know, no closed country can ever be a liberal country or a free country. Open borders are very important. Open borders for everyone, that you can leave the country. Entering the country permanently is a little bit another question, a little bit more difficult question, but you can leave and return to your country freely without any government intervention. So then we come to borders. And borders, I've heard this morning there are no borders in Europe. That's wrong. Even inside the European Union, there are borders in the European Union. Those are open borders. We have the freedom of movement and so on. But those borders are nevertheless very, very important. And therefore I will explain why. Borders, also in the liberal concept, are borders between different constituencies, different regions. At this point we speak about different states. Those are important borders because on one side of the border there's one legislation, on the other side of the border there's another one. We could say, okay, but if we would have a perfect liberal legislation, if there is such thing like a perfect liberal legislation, why not apply to all countries, to the whole European Union? That means there are no more borders anymore. One legislation in a perfect democratic way agreed upon in Brussels, wouldn't that be a liberal model? It's a question. And I know liberals, even in the party, our liberal party in Germany, who are very close to this position, actually. They think if we do liberal things in Brussels for the whole Europe, that's fine. But they are right only to a certain extent. And I will try to explain what this extent could be. That's not an easy to answer question, but more general remark first. We need competition between institutional arrangements. This was one of the strengths of Europe in the 18th, 19th century, when Europe emerged as an economic superpower, as the only economic superpower at this time, not as a political entity, but as the most developed and most fastest developing region in the world by far. It was not only competition of entrepreneurs and economic competition, it was institutional competition. The most easiest way to explain it, if you have a lot of different entities and you can switch between them, that puts a lot of pressure on the legislation to make good legislation, where you stimulate economic growth, where you give a very, very strong stimulus for people to invest, for people to work hard, and so on. And I think that's also important for Europe today, not only because it stimulates economic growth, but because the other side of the coin, liberalism, one side of the coin is freedom. The other side of the coin is responsibility. And this not only applies to individuals, this also applies to political entities, to politicians, to governments on all levels. And therefore, borders are important because borders define the limits or the borders of responsibilities. And if you have only something like a central responsibility for everyone and everything, at the end, nobody bears this responsibility. We have problems with this, with shared responsibilities, with unclear responsibilities at the moment at the European level at a huge extent. From my perspective, the whole Euro crisis is a crisis of not clearly defined responsibilities. And I will not go into this, but I think Europe needs and probably all other continents need as well, political systems with clearly defined areas of responsibilities, with clearly defined competencies. We can discuss which competency should be in Brussels, which should be at the national level, but we need clearly defined political entities, and that's not a perfect rule, but the smaller the better applies to many fields of politics in this case. Not to all, but to many fields. And that is a strong argument in favor of, we Germans are very skeptical about the word nationalism. I prefer somehow regionalism, yeah? But actually it does not matter so much whether it is a state or an autonomous region, from my perspective. Probably you in Catalonia, it's the other way. But if you have the competencies and the rights to make your own decision, and nobody interferes in certain spheres of decision making, for example, in social policies, and there are more examples, that's a very good thing. And the other side, again, is that then your government or the government of any entity bears a full responsibility and cannot ask the higher level, the higher echelons of power, wherever they sit, please, we did some mistakes and probably we cannot change those mistakes, give us money or give us whatever, help us. That's very important. Therefore, I would say this cosmopolitan nationalism could be a liberal concept, first, and if individual rights are respected and guaranteed, and second, if the nation or the state, I will not go into this discussion, it's a very tough discussion, but bears on all areas which are by constitution or by whatever are guaranteed to it, bears full responsibility. That's the most important thing then. And then borders, as Professor País this morning said, they are nothing metaphysical. They can be changed, and that should not be a problem to change this kind of borders. It's much easier to change open borders and then to change borders inside the European Union when also the new entities are member of the European Union or whatever are still in the play, than the case when they are closed borders. For example, we have some cases, but one especially good case of a country gaining independence without any war in the European Union, that's Slovakia. The Czech Republic and Slovakia, their divorce was quite peaceful. There's all a little bit of bad rhetorics in it, but it is quite peaceful. And now they are absolutely happy. I remember when I came, that's my last remark, I remember when I came to the border between Czech Republic and, I don't know exactly, it was 97 probably, 97, 98. And both countries created huge buildings on the border to introduce border controls, still in the 97, 98. Now everything is rotten there. Nobody needs it. And that's, from my perspective, good. We need borders, and we can create new borders if it's the will of the people, but those borders must be open, completely open. Individual rights must be respected. And the new states should bear full responsibility in all areas they are responsible on. And then cosmopolitan nationalism, from my perspective, is a liberal concept. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Tamm, for a very enlightening presentation in which you clearly anchored the concepts that we are supposed to discuss today.
Phenomena constitute an unprecedented threat to the survival of minority cultures, minority nations, minority identities. Thus, there's a pressing need for minority groups to reassert themselves and to resist the homogenizing imperative in this age of uncertainty. I know the time is flying by, So in this book, The Time of Uncertainty, then I try to develop a framework in which we have three notions that are extremely central to the realization of this anchored cosmopolitanism. The first element is a politics or a principle of moderation. So we need, in fact, to go back to Montesquieu and pay attention to what he had to say in terms of balance of power, equilibrium, being reasonable in our argumentation, and so on and so forth. Fight, oppose autocratic, totalitarian, tyrannical elements that could be within the field of politics, and instead move forward with a politics of moderation to limit people like Vidal Quadras with nonsensical statement. We need also to develop a principle such as the principle of dignity. And this is, in fact, I was looking at the famous editorial in los periódicos, and I thought this was one of the most interesting editorial that was jointly published a couple of years back. And in fact, the principle of dignity is one of the most fundamental elements to give meaning to the life of individual community at the same time. And finally, and probably the one that trumps all of the other principles, is the principle of hospitality. Hospitality is something that Europe now is starting to neglect, and we need to be alert. I mean, if we have nationalist and cosmopolitan ideas and values, we need to be much more hospitable toward people who are in need, and not simply go and take the better element from the crop in other countries, but in fact try to assist them, not simply try to take the better element. So I hope I've been able to raise some issues that might have prompted some of your questions, and I'm very much looking forward to hear your question on this anchored cosmopolitanism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for going so deep into what we are dealing with today. For those of you who did not have the chance to buy the book, you can still go to a close library. We have the Catalonia library just 5 minutes away from here, and you can buy it. It's again Temps d'incertituds, assajos sobre el federalisme i la diversitat nacional from Alain Gagon, and as you know, he's from Quebec, so he brings, let's say, the view from, I would say, one of the most perfect, quite perfect, federal countries in the world, together with others like Australia. Here in Europe, we have a different tradition, especially in Southern Europe. Maybe we have not tried, but we have tried. We have not tried the federalist spirit, but we have tried to convince the others, because this requires from consensus building, and there are some that are still trying, and I'm glad that this is happening. But in any case, it's a reality that one has to look upon and has to understand. By the way, I hope and I guess that you all know that the sovereignist in Quebec won the general elections in Quebec just 1 month ago. It was 4th of September, if I'm not mistaken, that there were elections. And now they have formed a minority government led by a woman, by Pauline Maroise. And we will, let's say, we will see and we will study the developments that are occurring in this stateful nation, if you like it more. Not stateless, but stateful. Okay, so now we move to our last professor, last speaker for today's panel debate. He's Professor Dr.Ireneusz Krzemiński, and he comes from Poland. He has long-standing education. I mean, his master's at the Institute of Sociology from Warsaw University. He holds a PhD at the Institute of Sociology at Warsaw University. He has been teaching in several universities, at the Institute of Sociology, at the University of Warsaw, at the Gdańsk University. He has been the rector, the dean of the College of the Human Resources Management in Warsaw. He has also been professor and vice dean at the Academy of Communication and Public Media. What's interesting as well is that he was advisor, I understand it this way, he was advisor to the former Prime Minister and co-founder of the Solidarity Movement, Mr. Varsòvia, quite some years ago, but yet in a crucial period for the development of that country. He has been also advisor to the Minister of Culture in Poland. He's a member of the Executive Committee of the Polish Pen Club, which resembles writers. Writers, no, because you have a very extensive CV, and he has, of course, conducted several research studies. So, Mr. Krzemiński, feel welcome, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. I must tell at first that I'm very happy to be in Barcelona because I've never been before. So for many of my colleagues, it was something like looking for me as how it's possible not to be in Barcelona. So now coming back to Warsaw, I'll be in better social situation, you know. So thank you very much for this invitation. But I think that also for me it was very interesting intellectually. So it will be difficult for me to read my paper prepared because it's a revolution in my home, in my mind, you know, after this seminar, and I would like to say something maybe not quite new, but a little different, so maybe sorry for maybe it will be a little chaotic, but I think it will be trying to solve some questions which are taking into account during this discussion. First of all, I must tell that I will be following, you know, this skeptical attitude of Professor Gagnon towards the cosmopolitan as such a positive concept using during our seminar. Because I found that originally it was a concept which was just used by Alfred Webb, and he was a 19th century activist, fighter for Ireland, Irish national values, national consciousness. But on the other hand, he was I don't remember, governor or vice king of the India. And this concept, cosmopolitan nationalism, it was the concept of the national autonomy, just in the scope of the Great Britain Empire. So it is a very special using because, of course, it's referring to this universalism ideas, universal aspect of cosmopolitanism, of course. But on the other hand, when I'm just looking at this concept in 19th century, it was completely different. It was completely impossible to use it. For example, the description of the situation in Poland, but I saw also in another part of Europe, which was moving towards national independence. Of course, it's a great discussion in the sociology if the state is producing nation or nation is before the state, but still we could tell now that even in our reality, in our times now, we could see how the new nations aspire to have independent states. You know, this political element of this creation of the nation and aspirations, national aspiration is very important and very common. So, I would like thinking why this cosmopolitan nationalism could be used in description of our situation now. And I found it possible to do it if we reinterpret this cosmopolitan term in this positive liberal way, as Professor Gagnon told about it. It's very close to my idea. But on the other hand, I would put another criticism towards the cosmopolitan as a mainly attitude, because a cosmopolitan is somebody who is from this universalistic, very individualistic point of view, treating, all of the nations. He is not rooted in any community. in a nation community. You know, he is a person, he is a individual. If possible to say, individual against the world. And of course, coming to different nations, to coming to the different parts of the world, he should respect the norms which are just in this nation or in this culture. So it should be very much done to reinterpret this cosmopolitan attitude toward this respecting of something which is a great West achievement, coming, you know, from Enlightenment, but also with Christian roots. You know, the idea of the human rights, individual rights, and even citizen rights. By the way, I could add that even Pope John Paul II naturalized human rights and said as a natural is given by the God to the person. So, you know, you know, such an operation, I'm not very crazy about such an operation about the cosmopolitan nationalism. I think the idea of, as Professor Gagon said, the liberal nationalism is much more better and, how to say, closer to the most important ideas. Because, you know, I think the phenomenon of nationalism is that after the Second World War in Europe, it was creating a special entity that just developing and becoming into our European Union. Because, you know, the nationalism was the great threat. It was something which was, how to say, this chauvinist nationalism was a main threat for the modern democracy. And it was also meaning the changing of democratic rules, democratic order, because it's creating something what should be called liberal democratic state, liberal democratic order and ideal of democracy, which just put in the heart of this democratic order the human and citizen rights. Because democracy couldn't, it was necessary to be liberal. And it was the case of these democracies at the beginning of 20th century. I should remember that Hitler was just chosen during completely democratic elections. So we should protection of these individual rights and citizen rights. And you know, if you should look from this point of view on the liberal concepts, because of course it's possible to find now such a nationalism which is just starting with a declaration to take into account the liberal values. That means there's human and citizen rights. Even now it is very interesting what is going on these Arab revolutions, because even there's Islamist parties declaring that will protecting main citizen laws. That is, I think, a great success, you know, this new concept, this great cultural achievement of the West. But if we are looking what is going now in Europe, and especially after our seminar first day, it is something which is showing that is special Europe, which was done after the war. Europe in which nations are playing, if I could say such a metaphor, the Europe is a great stage on which, you know, the national states and nations are playing their performances and trying to create special European community. In some sense, of course, it means that to be European, it starts to be a part of personal and national identity. And when I'm looking what we're going to do during these 2 days of seminars, I could say that we are really some illustration that European consciousness, European identity is existing. But of course, it's very elitist, I think, elitist phenomenon. Because we have now the great movements, nationalistic movements. If possible to say, I'm just using in my paper such a metaphor, the Billing's banal nationalism is becoming populist nationalism. And maybe there are some very threatening movements, but if you remember what Mark said about the Netherlands, it is possible to say that even these nationalistic movements are maybe not so aggressive, they are not so absolutizing the national values as it was before the war, but still, as a Hungary case is showing us, there are in every case, nationalism is going, to limit some human and some civil rights. Maybe they are not openly against democratic order, except some very radical movements, but still these nationalistic feelings, these nationalistic movements, this national atmosphere, which is now very vivid in the Europe, on the east and the west the same, it is something which is threatening and is changing, this Europe as a common scene where people and nations could playing their own values and everybody could participate in these different values of different nations, So we could come to Barcelona to try this fantastic food, or go to Helsinki. It's completely another, taste, and we could in our nation, how to say, in our nation customs, adopt other elements from other nations. But I think that our situation now in Europe is also showing that it was special foundation for such a phenomenon. Of course, it's the economic growth and economic success, which was, developing in such a long time. I think it's absolutely phenomenon to have such a great, promising developing in economy and such a promising situation like it was to our days. And now is such a situation, and this national problem is coming back from two sides. First one, as I said, there is national movements which are more or less, if there are even different, and it was national ideologies at the beginning of 20th century, they still have something from these old ideologies. They are still real nationalists. But on the other hand, the problem is also for European politicians. I think that they are in a special trap, because if you look for the discussions of Mr. Merkel or President Hollande or other great European leaders, they should play two different roles. And first of all, they should play the role in the interest of this great economic organism. It means, unified Europe, based on the strong cooperation, many links, the system of cooperation between many different nations. But still, it is based, their main economic interests, are sovereign. And on the other hand, they are national politicians. They are legitimized as a very important person in Europe by their nation citizens. So therefore it is a controversial point of view, because as far as I could imagine, I am also the advisor of Polish Prime Minister in the Special Economic Council, so 2 years. So also I'm not have many knowledge about economy. So after this training, I catch the sense of the problems. And as far as I could define the crisis now, it is a great problem which is not only economic one, it is political and nationalistic, if you could say so. We are coming back to this federalism. Because the solved the problem of Eurozone, it means to create a very, how to say, new entity which will be controlling these economies and especially these national banks. So they should not be sovereign bank of German, Poland, or something else, Spain, and so on. It is only one solution, because it should be one controlling power deciding, about the all of the Europe as a competing with the world. But nations, even this nationalistic, this bad nationalistic, or this, how to say, liberal nation, they are against this, you know. Because this ideal of Europe as a stand for national experience, national identity, it is something very important, you know. We feel Poles, Spanish, Catalonian, Slovaks, and so on, and we want to cooperate. We are open to cooperation. We want to participate in this new community European, but still we want to be Poles, Catalonians, and so on. It is a controversial problem, of course, how to solve it. And, well, federalistic ideas, there are first which are coming to mind. It was a proposal 2 years ago, I think, you know, it's a discussion in Germany. It was also the voice of Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs, which was so crazy attacked by the Poles, not only true Poles, in Poland, because it means that we are losing our sovereignty. So maybe it will be other idea how to resolve this problem, how to make, you know, such institutions, European, which will be controlling without such a great pain, you know, this national banks, national economies. But if you look what the situation is meaning for Catalonia, it is not very promising, because truly speaking, the direction of the developing of Europe and to resolving the great economic problems, it means to how to say, degradation the states at all, you know. If not nations, so degradation the states. But, you know, Catalonian wants to have their own state, which is something which is very important and very special values. So it's also possible to see how the liberal values are not enough for the description of the human needs and human feelings. Because, as far as I could know, in democratic Spain, human rights and citizen rights of Catalonians are not broken down. There are not any obstacles to developing Catalonian consciousness, Catalonian art, Catalonian language, as this seminar is showing us. But still it's not enough for Catalonians. They want to create their own independent political body. That is, it means state, simply. So that is, it is, of course, it will be the state. I'm absolutely believe that will be state will be liberal in the sense which you are talking about. Also, you should remember. It is also in somebody told about maybe Tamm was Mr. Tamm said about it. You know that the movement just striving into the independence, the national independence, are very open, are very humanistic, say so, and very liberal, but changing rapidly after, you know, the fulfilling the aim. You know, I know also the good example in Poland when the great movement of solidarity, which was, I think, the main cause of the collapse of communism, after the freedom was fulfilled, completely changed, and people who fight together and quarreling even together start to be fighting with each other. And this element, you know, of the nationalism, this bad Polish nationalism is coming back now by the Mr. Krzemiński, which was said about him, you know, who was maybe not very deeply, but very involved in the solidarity movement. So that's also something we should remember. You know, the history showing us that such very liberal national movements could change when they're coming to the end of their aim. So, but I hope that will be not the case of Catalonia. Czechoslovakia, the example of Czechoslovakia may be the best one for the future. Thank you very much.